Hello, so today we are going to talk about how to basically make your game fun. And this is like the second part of game design, basically a very fundamental part of it. This is basically how you can, like when you have a certain amount of like game mechanics that like work together, how to make them feel good. So, a little introduction to myself. So I'm Mridul Pancholi, I'm an artist, animator, game developer. I'm also into like filmmaking and stuff. I professionally work as an artist and animator, and right now I'm releasing a lot of games on Steam. So these are a couple of the artworks I've made. These are a couple of game animations that I've worked on. So the structure of this talk. I want to talk about like first I want to define game feel in a higher abstract theoretical way. This is working, right? This is working, right? Okay. So and then I want to talk about where this idea of game feel comes from, what it is, and like derive it from almost like first principles. I want to talk about the principles of game feel, like how, like what are the core aspects of it if one has to like if one wants to master it. Then where to implement these principles in like which moment to moment part of your game you should be implementing these things, and then how to develop your own sense of game feel or style. So when like every artist has a style, right? So and your favorite game designers, like just your favorite one, think about them. They probably have a way that their game feels, and it's very unique to them. So how you can go about developing your own thing. And then I will give like a step-by-step example of one of my games on how like I take like a very simple mechanic of like a top-down shooter and slowly add small tweaks and things that like make it fun moment to moment. And this is the part that I'm really excited about, by the way. So let's define game feel. Game feel or game choose is fundamentally how the game communicates its mechanic to the player. So every art has a way of speaking to the audience that it's engaging with, right? In games, it's like almost literally, the game talks to you. The game tells you what the mechanics are, rewards you, and punishes you based on how you're performing and how you're interacting with those mechanics. So game feel is how that game does that, and it is very important. It's fundamentally a presentational part of your game mechanics. So once you have the game mechanics, let's say a player jumping on a platform, how you can communicate to the player that hey, this is what's happening. Because if you guys have ever played a game, you guys should know that like whenever you show it to someone, they don't get it how you get it, and so it's very important to understand like how you can do that. So it's about creating appropriate and meaningful responses in moment-to-moment gameplay. And it also is a very subconscious thing. So like when the game feel is there, the player will feel it. The player will feel, okay, I like playing this. I don't know why, but I really like playing this. But if the game feel is not there, you will not be, like the player will feel it's clunky, or like they will get tired of it. So a lot of beginner games, even the games released on Steam that you play and you feel like, okay, this is like, I'm not enjoying it. The reason that you don't do that is because the game feel is like not good there. Like it's a fundamental game thing that a lot of beginners, a lot of like big games also miss. So also it is an overall effect that is achieved through an amalgamation of hundreds of tweaks, addition, subtraction of elements to make your core gameplay engaging. So let's derive game feel from the first principles almost. So let's talk about butterfly effect. So our reality, everything that we see around each other, like us, is affected by infinite causes and effects. Every cause is preceded by an effect, right? So game feel in essence is the replication of this aspect of reality. Like you know how like art depicts reality. This aspect is like exaggerated in game feel. Another thing is principle of exaggeration and contrast. So this is like if you are any kind of creator, you need to understand this. Like our brain makes sense of reality by figuring out the differences between two things. So it will see dark and light for painters, it will see hot and cold, it will see what's sweet or sour. And the more difference there is, the more we are drawn to that thing. So if you are an artist, you'll understand this. The like how composition is made is like the focal point in a photograph or a painting should have the most contrast so that our so that our eyes go there. So that's how our brain makes sense of reality by using contrast. So game field is this exaggeration of this butterfly effect of making sure that whatever the player does has causes and effects, of making sure that the way the game speaks to you has an energy of like it speaks to you in the right way and in an appropriate and meaningful way. And also, as I said, game feel is very subconscious. Like, if it's not there, people will not play your game, but if it's there, no one will complain. So, it's very important. So, where do you use these principles? So, there are two places that you must think about. I'll talk about the, like, how, what to use in, like, I'll give a more practical example of this too. But just for now, I want to give, like, a more theoretical like framework on how to go about thinking it, because when I show the example, you guys will be able to understand where I'm coming from and how to not get bogged down by any formula. So this is like the basic, maybe almost like obvious theory, but once we understand this, we'll have like, we can be creative, right? We won't have to follow like just one way of doing things. I'll show you my way of doing things, but so this is the theory. So where do you use these principles? First is when you have like a core set of core mechanics that are working together. Maybe it's a first-person shooter game that you're working on. So the core mechanic will be two things: the movement and the shooting. And so you first have to think and really think about like what are these core things that your game is working with. So one will be how the player moves, what the inertia is, and all these things, and how the player shoots, like what the recoil is, what the knockback is, what are the other effects. So once you understand these things, these are the places where you should be using the principle of exaggeration and contrast, and also the principle of the butterfly effect. So we'll talk about that too. Another thing is Pareto's distribution. So in this case, basically what Pareto distribution is, it sounds obvious, but 80% of the playing in your game will happen with only 20% of the elements that you have in your game. So the player will only interact with 20% of your elements 80% of the time. So for example, let's say first person shooter again. The player will, almost all the things that the player will do, almost all the time will be shooting and moving, right? That sounds obvious, but it's very important to realize that our game is like almost, it has infinite bugs, like every game has. And all we have to do is just fix and like tweak 20% of it. And if we can do that perfectly, then 80% of the work is done. And so these are the two places that you should think about it. First is what the core mechanics are, and second is this concept of Pareto's distribution, like just to figure out the 20% which the player will be doing 80% of the time, and fix that first, and tweak that and apply these principles of game feel first. So inherently, game feel is about feedback. It's about how the game speaks to the player. If the game will be rewarding you and punishing you in some way. So what is the nature of that punishment? And exactly what it is, like not in an abstract way, like literally what it is. So if the player gets hurt, maybe the screen gets red, or maybe like it gets into slow motion, and all these small things. And as I said, like very obvious in hindsight, but like when you're in the process of making games, these are the things that we very like almost everyone tends to forget when they start out making games. So as I said, like if it works, no one will know. But if it does not, everyone will like feel that. It'll feel very awkward and jarring and fun stopping. So how to improve your sense of game feel? So one thing, game design is a very young subject in like humanity. Like art has been around for thousands of years, music has been around thousands of years, science, everything else, but game design is like 20 or 30 years old. So because of that, there is no formal way of learning it apart from just studying the great masters, your favorite people like Hideo Kojima or whoever that they will be, like some indie developers. So these are the ways that I go about studying and improving my sense of game feel, and this can be different for everyone. But these are the things that work for me personally. Also, I have like these artworks to like not bore you guys to death. Just some stuff that I worked on. So, okay, let's start with 12 principles of animation. So, I guess you guys might know about this already, but animators have figured out how to make anything that's moving visually appealing. And how they did that was like figure out these 12 principles that like if you apply to any animation, it will be better. It will look more visually pleasing. It will look accurate, readable, and it will also look potential to apply these things in your own game like, with your code and stuff. So study linear interpolation and Bezier curve. So this is also one of the this is a derivation of one of the principles of animation, which is arcs. Everything in real life organic moves in arcs. Nothing moves in straight lines. So if you're animating something, if you make something arc-like, it will be more naturalistic. It will feel more real. So one of the ways that you can do that through code, if you're a game developer, is like learn about linear interpolation, very basic stuff, and Bezier curves, and apply it wherever you can. Especially apply it to the places which are core to your gameplay. So if a card, like I'm making a card game right now, so like we have made sure to wherever there can be like wherever there is a motion, like a card is moving from one place to another, we have applied some level of variance and linear interpolation. Another very cool example is the reloading animations in Call of Duty. So if you have played the old Call of Duty games, they have this like the reloading animations are okay, they're good, right? But like the recent ones, there's like this level of punchiness. Like you want to reload. It's such a funny thing, but like they have put some overshooting and exaggeration in the animation, so you really want to reload. It's such a weird thing that they have figured out, and it took them like so long to figure this out. Like so many games, but the reloading animation. Like study how it has changed. Call of Duty's reloading animation. That's where this and so what they figured out is the game feel of how they want to make their gun feel, which is not. They look realistic, but they are not realistic. They are they're an exaggerated form of reality. So, removing repetition. So this is very important. Our brain is very good at identifying repetition, like in anything, and also like identifying where there is no pattern. And we are pattern-seeking machines, right? So make sure to add variations wherever you can, sonically or aesthetically. So and realize that like any gameplay mechanic you will have a certain sense of repetition. So if you can add some level of variation into it, some level of meaningful variance into it, it will really matter. So just for an example, if you're making a simple platformer game, and whenever the player touches the ground, there is some dust. So that's like a basic game feel thing. Like you're communicating to the player that the player has touched the ground, like the character has touched the ground. So what if the player has some horizontal movement and he just falls on the ground, the dust comes in a slightly different angle, slightly a different animation. That will communicate to the player that okay, like this landing was slightly different than the landing that I had when I was just like landing without any horizontal speed. So these very small things, and see the thing is that like I understand that a lot of these principles and rules that I'm talking about sound very obvious. And I have to hammer this point home that it's not obvious when you're constantly like in that process, and what you have to think about is really these almost like millisecond things that your player will not even notice. And also so handling expectations. So every single player that plays your game will come with certain expectations because games are a depiction of reality. There are every game is. People like every game in some way, even if it's very abstract, it is taking some aspects of reality that we know inherently and it's replicating those things. So it's very important to understand that what expectations the player is coming in your game with, and think really long and hard about what perceptions a player is like obviously coming in with. So basically, when a player lands, he expects to see some dust. Like it's almost a subconscious thing, but that's what the player expects. When he's running through a patch of glass, the patch of glass should wiggle. These are very small things, but if you don't have it, it makes the game like non-responsive or unimmersive. And also like when a player is shooting something, there should be a appropriate level of recoil or knockback. Removing obstacles. So every game has a certain sense of ebb and flow into it, right? Every game highs and lows. So you have to, as I talked about this before too, that you have to fix the bugs that break the flow of your game. Tweak the game mechanics and make sure everything that you do, make sure you do everything in your power to like make something which is more, which keeps that flow going. Anything that stops that, like this is obvious, but like a player getting soft locked somewhere or like getting stuck in a wall, make sure you remove those bugs and make sure you iron out those features of your game elements. So, and also this is just a general game design advice. You won't be able to fix every bug. It's fine. Like every piece of software or logic will have infinite edge cases and bugs. So just fix the ones that break the flow of your game. Chain reaction. So this is more action based. This might sound more action based advice, like if you're making an action game. But make sure that so basically game feel is how the player speaks to the game speaks to the player, right? Make sure that there are some parts of the game, if you can, if your game allows it, to have like a cascading effect. Because the game is speaking more to the player then. And the player will recognize the contrast of when the game spoke less and now how the game is speaking more. And if you can have that contrast, then the player will have a certain, like more level of engagement and immersion in the game. So, as I said, I'm working on a card game right now. You guys can play it, and it's not completely coded yet, but there are like synergizers and afflictions in the game. And what happens is when you choose that game, when you choose that card, and if there are some afflictions on you or some synergizers, right now I'm in the process of coding it, but basically every one of those synergizers and afflictions will come one by one, like it will have separate movement, just to hammer home the point that, okay, this thing matters, the game needs to tell the player that. So, some of the examples are basically, let's say there is a barrel and there are some other explosive barrels around it. When you shoot one, that should trigger another barrel, and it should like cascade. That is very fun. Like just try coding something like that. It's very fun. Even just like that simple thing. It's not a game, but even that. Sturdy, I would suggest these are some of my favorite games: Nuclear Throne and Broforce. So these, like, if you want to understand how game feel can be like the peak of game feel, how you can make a game feel really nice, even if you're losing, you're having fun. Study Nuclear Throne and Broforce. And then there's this recent game, Bellatro. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. It's a card game, and the game feel in this game is like top notch. It's so good, in fact, that like recently the guy who made this, it's like a single guy who made this, and he tweeted that he had to like in his will write that when he like passes away, these casinos cannot legally use the game design mechanics and the feel of the game, because it is so addictive that someone might use it to like earn millions of dollars and exploit him. So he had to write that he can't use the game design that he has used, and that like just goes to show like not like part of it just goes to show that how powerful, like if you figure your game feel out, how powerful it can be. Telegraphing. So this is like again one of the 12 principles of animation, which is called anticipation. And one of the but in game design it's slightly more important because telegraphing is basically conveying something. So if let's say you are in a boss fight, if you guys have played Hades, you guys have noticed this. Whenever the boss goes back to attack, there is some the area that boss will attack, it gets lit up by some red blip or something, and then you know that you can't stand there, you have to move away from that place. God of War also did that. Almost all of the action games have some level of telegraphing. So how you go about it, these are very obvious things, but understand the core principles first, what your game is about, and then list down the point that needs to be telegraphed to the player, which part of this gameplay I need to tell to the player. And this is not obvious at first, how would someone know when I land some dust needs to come out in a platform game, but it looks obvious now, but how did Someone had to figure that out. It took a long while to figure that out, right? So list down all the points, and then research and study how your favorite games have telegraphed those points. So how Super Mario has done it, how Celeste, if you guys know that, have done it, and then try to replicate that. And the thing with like any creative pursuit is if you try to replicate the masters, you'll find your own way of doing it. You'll find what you like, what you don't like. You'll take the pieces that you really like, and then you'll start forming like a sense of style that you will be known for, right? If you can master this, and obviously it's a process of trial and error. Like your sense of game feel will take multiple games. Like as I said, Call of Duty took a long time to figure that reloading animation on such a small part. So yeah, the mindset. This is a general advice on like when you're going about making games, like designing games, and also like when you're figuring out game feel. It's a process of trial and error. It's a process of making hundreds of minor tweaks, removing things that obstruct, adding things that make the flow of your game better. It is supposed to be filled with failed attempts and experimentation, just like any truly creative pursuit. Because you're figuring out what you like and what you don't like. So most of the things in the world you won't like. So it is supposed to be time-consuming and frustrating. And as I said, it takes multiple games to develop fully. But once it clicks, man, it is beautiful. Like playing a game which has nailed the game feel, it's so fun. You want to keep playing it even if you are having the worst time. So I mean, look at like these multiplayer games like the mainstream ones, Counter-Strike, Valorant. The game feel is so good, and even if you're losing, there's a sense of hey, I want to keep playing this. There are other mechanics that reward that too, but those won't survive without the core assumption of how fast the player should be moving, what should be the weight of things, the weight of a gun, and everything. So in a theory, this is a QR code for an article that I've written based on whatever I've talked about, plus some other stuff. So if you guys want to just read about that, you can like this QR code will take you to that Google Doc. And after that, I'll show you like a live example of something I coded. And yeah. Okay, sorry. I'll show you. This is the fun part. Wait. Stay there. This is the fun part. So, okay. I don't know how I do it. So this is a simple game that I've made where like there is this enemy that I just like blue, and there is a player, the yellow one, and the enemy is like shooting these like projectile thing like a laser or something, and the enemy telegraph. So this is a very basic thing, right? And it's not that fun. It's all right. So slowly I'm going to start adding things on this. So yeah. So I've added like some linear interpolation and like Bezier curves in the movement. So the player moves like slightly more smoothly now, and also the enemy. Like you can see like it's a very subtle thing. So these will be very subtle additions in the game, like almost subconscious. But slowly you'll see how the game starts having like sense of fate and immersion into it. Now after this, I've added a responsive camera, so it's hard to do it now. But like the camera follows the mouse now, right? And I can also shoot basically. Like these small things. Now I added some animations in the bullets and also made the bullets bigger because that's the part that I want to telegraph. That the bullets exist and then they can hit the enemy. So I've killed them. It's fine, but yeah. Right. I wish I had 3 hands, but okay. So, and then I've added some variation. So the bullet shooting is the part that is going to keep repeating, right? So what I did was just added a bit of variation in how the bullets are sprayed. And even that, like, it adds so much life into it, right? Like, now there is, like, the game is communicating that, hey, like, there is some sense of recoil or knockback. Not exactly, but yeah. I've added some screenshots, so this is like personally my favorite thing. But like now you can see certainly how like whenever I shoot or whenever the bullet hits the enemy, like there is a sense of screen shake. Now I've added art and animation to the enemy. So I've added some limbs and now it looks like a very creepy bug. So this is from the game that I'll be, one of the games that I'll be showcasing. But you can see how like they have like art and animation is not like it's also part of game feel, but you can see how things are getting like more and more real or immersive. Not real. Real is a bad word. Immersive. I've added some basic death animation and hit effects. So now I want to communicate to the player that when I hit the enemy, I need to know if the bullet has hit the enemy, right? So now the enemy just flashed and also goes back slightly. And then they also die. There is a splat effect. Screen gets red when the player gets hurt. So now I think you can see like how I want to communicate to the player that the screen is like the player is just got hurt. So wait, I'll just hit again. So see, the screen is getting red and there is a very big screen shake, relatively big screen shake. So that tells the player, oh shit, I got hurt. So these are very obvious things, but everyone misses it. And I missed it for so long when I was working on some of my first game. And I've seen it like with every beginner person who starts making a game. So this won't work right now. I don't think we have like speakers, but basically I've added some sound effects in it. So, and then, oh, actually guys, there is a sound, right? There is some sound. Yeah. So when they die, they create this thing. So I died, yeah, and the game burned. So you need to remove this one if this ever comes. But yeah, so that's my talk. Thank you so much. If you guys need this is the document that you guys will have, and I have written everything plus a lot of other things that I probably forgot. So, and at the bottom of it, I'll also put like a link of resources for like the YouTube essays and like talks, and also games that you can study to improve your sense of game feel to make it like make your game like really fun. So yeah, that's my talk. Thank you.
So I wanted to ask, in the designing process and the development process, when should we consider adding gameplay or what should be the priority about it?
So it should be secondary to after you figure out the core, your minimum viable product basically. When your game mechanics are like settled there, you know that okay, this has potential. The only reason that this is not fun is because it's not presented well. That's when you start presenting it well basically, right? So, and it starts with, so I did not even have any art at the start. All I had was a shooting mechanic and like an enemy that attacks. So like that's where I was like, okay, I can consider making it a thing now. I can start researching and experimenting. And it's a process of experimentation. So I would say after the minimum viable product is done, start from there and keep this research up till your game is released. Because you'll find new and novel ways to make your game feel nice, right? And it's also one of the really important thing is game is dependent on the tone of your game. So I personally prefer like very like poppy, bombastic games. But if you're making a game which is like more somber, melancholic, then you have to present your game in that way, right? So your mechanics should feel like that. So that's a thing for you guys to explore. But yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
I had a question, like during the whole process, like what was most frustrating, frustrating stage of making the game, like at that point of time, was there any, because like you think a lot of, like you think of a lot of things at the same time while creating it. So was there a moment in the whole process where it
Which
was
game?
completely difficult?
Are you talking about any specific game?
No, not like just a general overview of the.
I think so. As I said, like this is more of a game design question, I would say. But as I said, games is a very young medium of expression. Like even like universities are still trying to figure out how to like make games, and what they basically do is like ask you to study games or like make a lot of games, because that's I guess the only way to do it. So I guess the most frustrating part is actually the trial and error. Because most of the times you will land on a bad game or a bad design thing, and then you have to like just plow your way through it and figure it out. So I think that's the most frustrating part. But I think as a creative person, that part should be frustrating because that's the only way to create something new, right? So yeah, that's yeah.